Do you have any idea how embarrassing you are? Daniel's voice echoed through the mall's marble hallway, sharp enough to stop strangers mid-step. His pregnant wife Emily stood frozen beside a returned baby stroller, her hands trembling, her cheeks burning under dozens of watching eyes. "You're a CEO's wife," he hissed, "and you're arguing over $80 like a beggar." Phones rose, strangers filmed. Emily said nothing. She simply lowered her head and walked away. But as Daniel stormed off, an old security guard leaned toward her and whispered something that made her freeze. "Ma'am, your car is still waiting at gate 3. Same as always." Emily had arrived in a city bus. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Amazing Folktale, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Hype up the video. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all around the world. Let's get started. Emily Grace Whitman was the kind of woman people forgot to notice, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Every morning, before the sun climbed over the city's rooftops, she was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor of their small rented apartment, a laptop balanced on her knees, typing freelance articles for clients who paid barely enough to cover the electricity bill. Daniel was asleep in the next room, dreaming of investor meetings and boardroom victories. He didn't know that half of what kept their lives running, the rent, the groceries, even the networking dinners he took credit for, came from Emily's quiet, invisible labor. She was 7 months pregnant. Her ankles swelled by evening, her back ached from sitting too long, but she never complained because Daniel had told her more than once, "I don't need extra stress right now, my company is everything. Please don't add to my problems." So she didn't. She swallowed her exhaustion, she swallowed her fear. She swallowed the hospital bills she hid inside an old shoebox so he wouldn't see them and panic before his big investor meeting. People who met Emily assumed she was simple. A quiet housewife, a struggling writer, a woman who wore the same 3 outfits on rotation and never asked for anything. Her college friend Samantha, now a junior lawyer, was the only person who saw the flicker of something else behind Emily's tired eyes. A kind of quiet, buried strength, like a woman carrying a secret too heavy to set down. "You don't have to hide everything from him, you know," Samantha told her once, over cheap tea at a roadside stall. "A husband is supposed to be a partner, not someone you protect from the truth." Emily only smiled faintly. Some truths aren't ready yet. What no one knew, not Daniel, not his co-founders, not even his accountant, was that Emily kept a locked wooden drawer in their bedroom. Daniel had asked about it once in the early days of their marriage. "It's just old family photos," she'd said. "Things from my father." He never asked again. He had no reason to. To him, Emily's father was a retired shopkeeper who'd passed away quietly, leaving nothing behind but an old wristwatch and some furniture. But late at night, when Daniel was asleep, Emily would sometimes open that drawer, run her fingers over a stack of documents bound in leather, and remember her father's voice, frail but firm, on the last night of his life. "Let them love you before they know what you're worth," he had whispered, gripping her hand so tightly it left marks. "The moment they know, you'll never know if it was ever real." She had promised him, and she had kept that promise for 4 years. Through their courtship, their wedding, their financial struggles, and every quiet night she transferred money into an account Daniel believed was an anonymous startup grant. She loved her husband, genuinely, desperately. Even when he forgot to ask how her day was, even when he raised his voice in front of strangers, even when, deep down, a small voice inside her began to whisper that something in their marriage had started to rot. She remembered the early days differently, before the company, before the pressure, before the version of Daniel who checked his reflection in shop windows more than he checked in on her. Back then, he used to sit with her on the balcony of her father's old house, listening to her talk about the books she wanted to write someday, the causes she cared about, the kind of life she imagined building with someone who saw her as a whole person, instead of a decoration. She used to think that man was the real Daniel, and the tired, short-tempered founder was just a temporary mask worn under stress. Now she wasn't so sure anymore which version was the mask, and which one was underneath. She just didn't know yet how deep the rot had already spread. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen and her whole body tensed. Zara Holdings, do not answer at home. She silenced it immediately, glancing toward the bedroom door to make sure Daniel was still asleep. Whatever Zara Holdings was, it was clearly something Emily needed to keep very, very far away from her husband. Not far from the glass towers of Daniel's office, in a modest two-room quarter behind an old garage, lived a man named Frank, known to almost everyone simply as Old Frank. He was in his 60s, with a spine slightly bent from years of driving and a face weathered by decades of quiet loyalty. For 22 years, Old Frank had worked as the personal driver for one family, the Whitmans. He had driven Emily's father to hospitals, to business meetings, to church every Sunday, and finally, to his grave. When Emily's father passed, most people assumed the driver would simply be let go, another employee absorbed into the churn of the city's labor market. Instead, something unusual happened. Emily kept him on, not as a driver anymore but as something closer to a guardian, a silent protector, a man who asked no questions and revealed no secrets. Old Frank was the only living person who knew exactly who Emily really was. He had watched her grow from a shy schoolgirl into a sharp, disciplined young woman who inherited not just her father's wealth, but his instincts, the ability to read people, to sense greed before it revealed itself, to stay calm while everyone around her panicked. Now, he watched something else. He watched Daniel. Every few days, Old Frank would park an ordinary, unremarkable sedan across the street from Daniel's startup office, sipping tea from a thermos, watching who came and went. To anyone passing by, he looked like a retired old man killing time. In reality, he was performing a duty he had sworn to Emily's father years ago, on that same hospital bed where the old man had whispered his final wish. Watch over her, Frank, not because she's weak. Because she's too trusting, that is her only weakness. Old Frank took that duty seriously. He had watched Daniel's company nearly collapse 8 months ago, watched the layoffs almost happen, watched the vendors threaten to sue, watched Daniel's face turn gray with stress in late-night parking lot phone calls, and then, mysteriously, the company had survived. An anonymous wire transfer arrived, routed through 3 separate shell accounts, untraceable to any name Daniel or his team could identify. No one at the company knew where the money came from. Old Frank knew exactly where it came from. He had personally delivered the paperwork to the bank himself, on Emily's instructions, in the quiet hours before dawn. Sometimes, watching Daniel from across the street, Old Frank felt something close to pity. The man had no idea he was standing on a foundation built entirely by the woman he mocked in shopping malls. He had no idea that every investor confidence he bragged about in board meetings was, in some invisible way, his wife's confidence in him. A confidence that was eroding quietly, meeting by meeting, insult by insult. One evening, Old Frank made a phone call from his car, his voice low. He spent another $10,000 on client dinners this month. Company can't sustain that pace. He paused, listening. Yes, little boss, I understand. I'll keep watching. Little boss. He never said Emily's name aloud, not even in private. Old habits, old loyalty, old caution, all of it wrapped into 2 quiet words that carried more protection than any bodyguard ever could. He hung up, glanced once more at the glowing windows of Daniel's office, and sighed. Foolish boy, he murmured to himself. You have no idea what you're standing on. Across the street, inside those glowing windows, foolish Daniel was, at that very moment, learning to lie better than he ever had before. Daniel had built his entire identity around one idea: the world respects winners, and winners never look weak. He was 32, sharply dressed, always early to meetings, and always the loudest voice in the room. Investors liked his confidence. Employees admired his energy. On stage at startup pitch events, he could make a struggling 2-year-old company sound like the next big success story, weaving numbers and dreams together so smoothly that people forgot to ask hard questions. But behind the confident smile was a man drowning quietly in debt, terrified that one bad quarter would expose him as a fraud. Not a criminal fraud, but the kind of fraud every ambitious person fears becoming, someone who built an image bigger than their reality. His company, a logistics tech startup called Rushline, had once been his proudest achievement. Now it was his heaviest burden. Loans were due. A key investor had quietly pulled out 6 months ago, And somewhere in the back of his mind, a dangerous thought had begun to grow. Maybe it's time to cut my losses and disappear from this mess. Quietly and profitably. At home, this pressure translated into something uglier. Small comments at first. Do you have to wear that to dinner with my investors? Can't you just smile more? You always look so tired. I need you to understand. Image matters. Everything about how people see me starts with how they see my life. Emily absorbed these comments the way she absorbed everything. Quietly, without argument, telling herself he was just stressed, just tired, just under pressure from the company. She made excuses for him even when strangers around them exchanged uncomfortable glances. At the office, Daniel had recently hired a sharp, ambitious investor relations specialist named Megan. She was confident in a way that reminded him of himself, direct, unapologetic, unbothered by the constant collapsing walls of his financial anxiety. Where Emily had grown quiet and careful over the years, Megan was loud, certain, exciting. You worry too much, Megan told him one evening, after the office had emptied out. You built this company from nothing. You don't need anyone's permission to make the moves that save it. Daniel liked hearing that. He liked it more than he wanted to admit. Around the same time, a man named Reynolds, a wealthy, calculating rival businessman who had been circling Rushline for months, reached out with a proposal. Sell me the company, Reynolds said over coffee, his tone deceptively casual. Quietly. Before your investors realize how bad your numbers actually look. I'll clear your debts, give you a clean exit, and you walk away looking like a smart founder who made a strategic decision, not a man who ran a company into the ground. It was tempting. Dangerously tempting. Daniel told himself he would think about it. He told himself he wouldn't actually do anything reckless. But that night, lying beside Emily, listening to her soft breathing, he felt something shift inside him, a small, cold decision forming in the dark. If this deal goes through, I don't need to explain any of this to her. I don't need to explain anything to anyone. He didn't yet know what that decision would cost him. He didn't know that the woman sleeping beside him, the woman he had humiliated over a return stroller, held more power over his company's fate than every investor, every rival, and every secret deal combined. He was about to make the worst mistake of his life, one quiet lie at a time. The dinner was supposed to be simple. A small gathering with two of Daniel's colleagues and their spouses at a mid-range restaurant near the office. Emily had looked forward to it all week, one of the rare evenings where she and Daniel would be seen together as a couple, not just as passing roommates managing separate stress. She wore her nicest maternity dress, did her hair carefully despite the exhaustion in her limbs, and arrived on time even though the bus ride left her slightly nauseous. It started fine, polite conversation, small laughs, but 20 minutes in, one of Daniel's colleagues asked Emily what she did for work. I write, she said simply. Freelance content, mostly. Freelance, Daniel repeated, a strange edge creeping into his voice. Which basically means she writes blog posts for pennies while I run an actual company. The table went quiet for half a second. Emily's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, the way she always did. It helps cover some bills, she said softly. Barely, Daniel muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, followed by an awkward laugh meant to make it sound like a joke. It didn't land like one. Later, in the car, a car that belonged to the company, not to them personally, the tension finally broke. Why would you say that in front of them? Emily asked quietly. Say what? It's true. It made me look small. On purpose. Daniel exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel. You're overreacting. I have investors watching everything about my life right now. How I dress, how my wife carries herself, how put together we look. Do you understand how much pressure that is? And you're upset about one comment? I understand pressure, Emily said, her voice suddenly firmer than usual. More than you think. Something in her tone made Daniel glance at her. For a brief second she looked like she was about to say something important. Something that had been sitting behind her eyes for years. Her lips parted. I could help you understand your own company's finances better than you think. The words rose in her throat, dangerously close to escaping. But she caught herself swallowing them back down, turning to look out the window instead. "Forget it," she said quietly. "Just drive." Daniel didn't push. He was too wrapped up in his own storm of anxiety to notice the storm brewing quietly beside him. That same week, an email landed in Rushline's legal inbox, one that would have changed everything if anyone had bothered to trace it properly. Subject: Quarterly Disclosure Request, Majority Shareholder. Identity protected under NDA Clause 14B. Please prepare third quarter financial summary for review by end of month. The company's young legal assistant skimmed it, assumed it was a routine formality left over from the original funding paperwork, and filed it away without flagging it to Daniel. No one connected the email to anyone. No one thought to ask who exactly Rushline's majority shareholder actually was. Later that night, Emily met Samantha for tea, exhaustion written across her face in a way she couldn't hide anymore. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Samantha said, studying her carefully. "I haven't," Emily admitted. "Is it the baby or him?" Emily didn't answer right away. She stared into her cup, watching the steam curl and disappear. "Both," she finally whispered. Samantha reached across the table and took her hand. "Emily, you need to tell him who you really are, before this gets more complicated than it already is. If I tell him now, while everything is already falling apart, he'll think I've been controlling him this whole time. He'll think I never trusted him. And if he finds out on his own, from someone else, at the worst possible moment, what do you think he'll believe then?" Emily's silence was answer enough. "Men like Daniel," Samantha continued gently, "don't want to be saved. They want to prove themselves. If the truth comes out the wrong way at the wrong time, it won't feel like love to him, it'll feel like humiliation." Emily closed her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her belly. "I know," she whispered. "I just don't know how much longer I can carry both secrets before one of them breaks me." She didn't know yet that the clock had already started ticking, and that the two secrets she was carrying, hers and Daniel's, were racing toward the exact same collision point. 2 weeks later, at a rooftop gathering meant to impress a group of potential investors, Daniel made a joke that would haunt him for the rest of his life, though he had no idea yet. Someone asked, half-jokingly, what his wife did for a living. "Honestly?" Daniel laughed, swirling the drink in his hand. "She practically sells scrap for a living. Old furniture, secondhand stuff, whatever she can get her hands on. I keep telling her, let me take care of things, but she likes to feel independent, I guess." The investors chuckled politely. Emily, standing several feet away holding a glass of water because alcohol wasn't good for the baby, heard every word. She didn't react. She had trained herself over years not to react in public. But that night, long after they returned home, and Daniel had fallen asleep, exhausted from performing confidence all evening, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. She opened an application she rarely touched at home. A secure investor portal, protected by a password only she knew. With a few careful taps, she authorized a routine quarterly board review of Rushline's financials. A request that could only be initiated by someone holding majority shareholder status. For one brief moment, before she closed the app, the screen displayed her full legal name and holding entity. Emily Grace Whitman, Zara Holdings PVT Ltd. Majority stakeholder, Rushline Technologies. She stared at it for a long moment, the glow of the screen lighting up her tired face in the dark kitchen, before locking the phone and setting it face down on the table. The next morning, chaos erupted quietly inside Rushline's office. Daniel's CFO approached him with a nervous expression. "Someone flagged your third quarter spending for a formal review. Legal wants a meeting this week." Daniel's stomach tightened, but his mind jumped immediately to the obvious suspect. "It's Reynolds," he muttered under his breath. "He's already trying to dig into our numbers before the sale even closes, trying to get leverage." He had no idea the review request had nothing to do with Reynolds at all. Later that afternoon, Megan found him in his office, arms crossed, clearly stressed. "You look like you're spiraling," she said, closing the door behind her. "There's a shareholder review request. I don't even know who initiated it." Megan tilted her head, studying him carefully. "You know," she said slowly, "I know people who can make issues like this disappear quietly, without anyone digging deeper into your finances. If this majority shareholder situation becomes a problem, I can help handle it before it becomes public." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, handle it? You make it sound like you already know something about this." Megan smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just mean I have connections, Daniel, that's all. Focus on getting Reynolds' deal locked in. Let me worry about the rest." He nodded, distracted, already moving on to the next fire he needed to put out. He didn't notice the strange confidence in her tone, the kind of confidence that belonged to someone who knew more than she was letting on. What Daniel didn't know was that his entire company was standing on a foundation his wife had built, and that foundation was now quietly beginning to shift beneath his feet, triggered by nothing more than his own careless words at a rooftop party. Somewhere across the city, in her quiet apartment, Emily placed a hand over her belly, feeling a small kick of protest, as if even her unborn child sensed the storm gathering above them. "Not much longer," she whispered to herself. "Just a little longer, and this will all make sense." She had no idea how wrong that promise would turn out to be, because the storm gathering wasn't just about money. It was about a secret far more painful than any hidden bank account. 3 days later, in a private lounge overlooking the city skyline, Daniel signed his name across a stack of preliminary documents, while Reynolds watched with the calm satisfaction of a predator closing in on wounded prey. "This stays between us," Reynolds reminded him, sliding the papers into a leather folder. "Once the majority shareholder consents, the deal finalizes immediately." Daniel barely glanced at that particular clause, buried on page 14, in dense legal language he didn't have the patience to fully absorb. Sale invalid without majority shareholder consent. Shareholder identity sealed under NDA clause 14B. He assumed it was boilerplate legal formality, some leftover clause from the company's original funding round years ago. He didn't ask who the majority shareholder actually was. He didn't think it mattered. In his mind, it was some faceless investment fund, distant and irrelevant, the kind of institutional shareholder who never showed up to meetings and never asked questions. He had no idea he was about to need that shareholder's permission to sell away his own wife's life savings. Across town, unaware of the documents her husband had just signed, Emily sat in her obstetrician's office, gripping the edge of the examination table as the doctor reviewed her latest test results with a concerned expression. "Your blood pressure is elevated again," the doctor said gently. "I know I've mentioned this before, but stress at this stage of pregnancy isn't just uncomfortable. It can be dangerous, for you and for the baby. Whatever is causing this tension in your life, Emily, you need to find a way to release it. Soon." Emily nodded, promising to rest more, promising to worry less, promises she had no real ability to keep. Even as she left the clinic, her phone buzzed with another call from Zara Holdings, a legal advisor needing her signature on an urgent matter related to the upcoming shareholder vote. She answered in a hushed voice, glancing around the parking lot to make sure no one she knew was nearby. That same evening, old Frank sat in his parked car outside a private lounge downtown, a small camera resting discreetly on the dashboard. Through the tinted glass, he watched Daniel and Reynolds shake hands, watched documents change hands, watched the quiet, careful body language of two men making an agreement neither one had witnessed. He had been photographing these meetings for weeks now, ever since he first noticed Reynolds' driver parking near Rushline's offices with unusual frequency. He didn't yet know exactly what the two men were planning, but decades of loyal service had taught him one unshakable truth. Secretive meetings between desperate men rarely ended well for the people who trusted them. He texted a single line to a number saved only as Little Boss, attaching nothing, saying nothing more than, "Another meeting tonight. Same two men, I have photos." The reply came quickly, "Keep them safe, don't confront anyone yet." 2 days later, a sealed envelope arrived at Emily's apartment by private courier, addressed simply, "For your review before Thursday's vote." She heard Daniel's key turning in the front door, just as she finished reading the first paragraph. Her heart lurched. Without thinking, she folded the papers quickly and slid them beneath a cushion on the couch, forcing a calm expression onto her face just as he walked in, exhausted and distracted, barely glancing at her before disappearing into the bedroom to take another phone call. She sat there for a long moment, one hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heartbeat slow gradually back to normal, the hidden envelope pressing against her palm like a ticking clock she couldn't silence. Thursday. The shareholder vote was scheduled for Thursday. She didn't yet know that Daniel had already signed away pieces of a company that legally required her permission to sell. And Daniel didn't yet know that the woman he'd been avoiding, dismissing, and quietly preparing to leave behind held the single signature that could destroy everything he'd secretly built with Reynolds. Two people, married for 4 years, sleeping in the same bed every night, and neither of them had any idea they were racing toward the exact same collision, from two completely opposite directions. The investor mixer was meant to be routine. Another evening of handshakes, business cards, and rehearsed small talk. Daniel moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, playing the role of confident founder even as his mind raced through the details of Thursday's approaching vote. Then an older investor, a man named Walter who had backed several companies in the city over the years, clapped Daniel on the shoulder with an easy smile. "You're a lucky man, you know," Walter said. "Zara Holdings never interferes with day-to-day operations. Most silent partners would have pulled funding after that whole mall incident went viral. Investors talk, Daniel, believe me. But your majority shareholder never even flinched. Quite loyal, that one." Daniel blinked, caught completely off guard. "Zara Holdings?" he repeated slowly. "I'm sorry. Who exactly is that?" Walter's easy smile faltered slightly, replaced by mild confusion. "Your majority shareholder. Surely you know who funds 70% of your company's operating capital?" Daniel forced a smile, covering the sudden cold sweat spreading across his back. "Of course, I don't usually deal with them directly. My legal team handles that relationship." He excused himself moments later, weaving through the crowd until he found a quiet corner, pulling out his phone and calling his CFO in a hushed, urgent voice. "Who is Zara Holdings? Why have I never heard this name before?" His CFO hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know much either. The identity's always been sealed under an NDA from the very first funding round, before you even brought me on. I assumed you knew who it was." Daniel ended the call, his mind spinning. For 4 years he had believed his own charisma and business instincts had single-handedly kept Rushline alive through every near collapse. Now, standing in a corner of a crowded rooftop event, he realized someone else, some invisible, silent figure, had been quietly holding his entire company's fate in their hands the whole time. That night, driving home in silence, he glanced sideways at Emily more than once, an odd, unfamiliar unease settling into his chest, though he couldn't explain why. Emily, sensing his shift in mood, almost broke that night, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table, watching him stare blankly at his phone. Something inside her softened, cracked slightly open. "Daniel," she began quietly, "there's something I need to—" His phone buzzed. He glanced down and, without thinking, answered it on speaker while grabbing a glass of water, forgetting for one careless moment that Emily was sitting right there. Megan's voice filled the kitchen. "Hey, just confirming, Thursday still works for finalizing everything with Reynolds." "Yeah," Daniel said, distracted. "Once the sale closes, I won't need to explain anything to her anymore. This whole mess will finally be behind me." Megan laughed lightly on the other end before he ended the call, completely unaware of the silence that had fallen over the kitchen table beside him. Emily sat frozen, her half-formed confession dissolving instantly in her throat, replaced by something colder, heavier, sharper. Her. He had said her. And there was only one her sitting close enough to overhear that sentence. She didn't cry. She didn't confront him. She simply stood, cleared her plate quietly, and walked to the bedroom, closing the door with practiced, controlled calm, while inside, Something in her chest shattered silently. The viewer, watching this unfold, now understood something neither Emily nor Daniel fully grasped yet. Daniel had no idea his own wife funded his company's survival, and Emily had no idea her husband was already planning to sell that same company and quietly walk away from their marriage the moment the deal closed. 2 secrets, 2 people. One Thursday, racing toward them both. With debt collectors calling twice a day and Reynolds pressing for faster movement on the sale, Daniel made a decision he would later regret more than almost anything else in his life. He needed cash, quick, untraceable cash to cover a personal loan payment before it triggered a default that would show up on Rushline's official records and spook the deal with Reynolds. Without telling Emily, he transferred a significant portion of their joint savings account into his personal account, telling himself he would replace it quietly once the sale closed. He didn't know that money wasn't simply a family cushion. It was money Emily had carefully, secretly set aside over months for their baby's hospital delivery, an account she'd built separately from her larger holdings specifically so it would feel personal, ordinary, like something a normal struggling couple might save together. When Emily discovered the withdrawal 2 days later, staring at the empty balance on her banking app, her hands shook so badly she had to set the phone down. That same week, doing laundry, she found something else. A hotel receipt crumpled in the pocket of Daniel's jacket, dated the same night he had told her he was working late with Megan on investor presentations. Her stomach twisted into a cold, sick knot. She didn't confront him immediately. She simply folded the receipt carefully and placed it inside her locked drawer, beside her father's old documents, a growing collection of quiet, painful evidence. Meanwhile, at a private meeting, Reynolds voiced a concern to Daniel that had been nagging at him for days. If this silent partner blocks the sale during Thursday's vote, you lose everything, Daniel. The company, the money, all of it disappears. Daniel waved off the concern with forced confidence. There's no way she'd block it, he said. Whoever this Zara Holdings person is, they're just a silent investor. They've never once interfered in 4 years. They won't even notice one more transaction. He had no idea how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. Around the same time, Samantha, increasingly worried about her friend's silence over the past week, decided to do something she probably shouldn't have. Using her access to a legal research database at the law firm where she worked, she ran a routine business registry search, simply hoping to understand more about the mysterious Zara Holdings Emily had mentioned once, months ago, in an unguarded moment. What she found made her sit back in her chair, stunned. Zara Holdings PVT Ltd. Registered owner, Emily Grace Whitman. Samantha stared at the screen for a long, silent moment, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving suddenly clicking violently into place. The quiet freelance writer, the old locked drawer, the mysterious calls Emily always silenced the moment anyone walked into the room. Samantha grabbed her phone immediately and called Emily, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and fear. Emily, she said the moment the call connected, we need to talk, right now. And I think you're walking into something much more dangerous than you realize. On the other end of the line, sitting alone in her quiet apartment, one hand resting on her swollen belly, Emily closed her eyes and exhaled a long, shaking breath. Outside, the evening traffic hummed faintly through the window, ordinary and indifferent to the way her entire world was quietly rearranging itself. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into this marriage 4 years ago, so certain that love, if it was real, would survive the truth eventually revealing itself. She had built her whole strategy around patience. Wait long enough, love hard enough, and the right moment to be honest would simply arrive on its own. Now, sitting alone with a hotel receipt hidden in a drawer and a stranger's voice replaying in her mind. Once the sale closes, I won't need to explain anything to her anymore. She understood, with a kind of quiet grief, that she had been waiting for a moment that was never actually coming. I know, she whispered. I found the hotel receipt. There was a long pause before Samantha spoke again, her voice softer now, heavier with dread. Emily, there's something else you need to know, and I don't think you're going to be ready for it. That night, after Daniel left for a late meeting, that Emily now understood meant something entirely different, She finally opened the locked wooden drawer she had guarded for 4 years. Inside, beneath the leather-bound folder of her father's old company documents, she found something she had deliberately avoided looking at for weeks. A thin stack of papers Daniel had left carelessly tucked inside an old jacket pocket months ago. Papers she had discovered by accident and hidden away rather than confront. Divorce paperwork, unsigned, drafted weeks ago, filed quietly with a lawyer she didn't recognize. A note scrawled in the margin, in Daniel's handwriting, in case things don't work out. She sat on the floor of their bedroom for a long time. Papers spread around her, feeling something inside her chest go strangely, dangerously still. Not the wild panic she expected, but a cold, clear calm, the kind of stillness that comes right before a person finally stops protecting someone who never protected them back. Old Frank arrived an hour later, summoned by a single text message. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, placing a small hard drive between them. "I've been recording their meetings for months," he said quietly. "Little boss, I did this without telling you at first, forgive me, but your father asked me to protect you and I feared this day would come. I have Daniel and Reynolds' meeting on camera. The signed documents. Everything." Emily stared at the small drive, her hands trembling slightly as she picked it up. "Show me." Together they reviewed the footage, Daniel signing preliminary sale documents, laughing with Reynolds over drinks, discussing the company's future as though his wife's 4 years of silent sacrifice had never existed. Then Samantha arrived, pale and anxious, carrying her laptop. "There's more," she said grimly. "I managed to access something I probably shouldn't have." A voicemail Megan left on the shared investor relations line, meant for Daniel, but recorded on the company's compliance system. She played it. Megan's voice, casual and confident, filled the small kitchen. "Don't worry about the wife. After Thursday, none of this will matter." Emily closed her eyes. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was calculated, deliberate cruelty. A plan built around the assumption that she was simply an obstacle to be managed and discarded. "The shareholder vote," Samantha said carefully, checking her notes. "It's scheduled for Thursday morning at Rushline's headquarters." Old Frank's expression shifted, a flicker of alarm crossing his weathered face. "Little boss, isn't your induced delivery scheduled for Thursday as well? Your doctor confirmed the date last week." Emily's hand instinctively moved to her belly, realization crashing over her all at once. Her husband's betrayal and her daughter's arrival were converging on the exact same day, the exact same hour, as though fate itself had grown impatient waiting for the truth to surface. She looked up at Samantha, then at old Frank, something steady and resolute settling into her tired eyes. "Then Thursday," she said quietly, "will be the day everything changes, all of it, at once." Samantha reached across the table, gripping her friend's hand firmly. "You don't have to do this alone." "I know," Emily whispered, glancing toward the locked drawer, now emptied of every secret it had ever held. "Not anymore." For the first time in 4 years, Emily Grace Whitman stopped hiding, and somewhere across the city, completely unaware of the storm gathering against him, Daniel slept peacefully beside a woman named Megan, confident that Thursday would be the beginning of his freedom. He had no idea it would actually be the end of everything he thought he owned. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of quiet stillness that always seems to settle over a city right before something enormous happens. Inside Rushline's largest conference room, Daniel stood at the head of the table, dressed in his sharpest suit, presenting the final details of the sale to Reynolds and a small gathering of board members. He spoke with practiced confidence, gesturing at projected slides showing profit projections and clean exit strategies, completely unaware that his entire foundation was about to be pulled out from beneath him. "All that remains," the company's legal chairperson announced, checking her notes, "is formal consent from our majority shareholder, who has requested to attend in person for today's vote." Daniel barely reacted, assuming it was simply a formality, some anonymous representative who would sign quickly and leave. The conference room doors opened. Emily walked in, visibly pregnant, dressed simply, her expression calm and unreadable. Old Frank walked slightly behind her, carrying a slim folder. Samantha followed close beside them. Daniel blinked, confused, then smiled awkwardly, clearly assuming his wife had shown up unexpectedly to surprise him, perhaps to offer quiet support before his big deal closed. "Emily," he said, forcing warmth into his voice for the benefit of the room. "This is a surprise. Everyone, this is my wife." The chairperson glanced up from her notes, addressing Emily directly with practiced formality. "Ms. Whitman, thank you for joining us. Shall we proceed with the majority shareholder consent vote?" The room went utterly silent. Daniel's smile faltered. "Wait," he said slowly, looking between his wife and the chairperson. "What did you just call her?" "Ms. Emily Grace Whitman," the chairperson repeated, slightly confused by his reaction. "Majority shareholder of Rushline Technologies, operating under Zara Holdings, since the company's founding 4 years ago." Daniel's face drained of color. He turned to Emily, searching her expression for some sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything other than the truth slowly crystallizing in front of him. "That's not possible," he said, his voice cracking slightly. You write blog posts. You don't have this kind of money." Emily stepped forward, calm despite the storm visibly raging behind her eyes. "I've personally funded this company for 4 years, Daniel. Before our wedding, through our engagement, through every single month you believed you built this alone." Gasps rippled quietly around the table. Reynolds' confident posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing with sudden, dawning understanding of exactly how badly this deal was about to collapse. Daniel tried desperately to recover, forcing a shaky laugh, turning toward the room. This is actually incredible, isn't it? My wife, quietly investing in my company this whole time. What a beautiful surprise." "Don't," Emily said quietly, her voice cutting cleanly through his performance. "Don't turn this into another story you tell to make yourself look good." Samantha stepped forward then, placing her laptop on the table, her expression steady despite the tension crackling through the room. "There's something else the board should hear," she said, "before any vote takes place." She pressed play. Megan's voice filled the silent conference room, cold and clear. "Don't worry about the wife. After Thursday, none of this will matter." Every head in the room turned toward Daniel. His face, moments ago flushed with panicked improvisation, now went completely white. That's not what it sounds like," he stammered, though even he seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, 4 years of silence finally breaking into something quiet, controlled, and devastatingly final. "I protected you," she said softly, "even when you didn't deserve it. I built this company back up when it was collapsing, and I let you believe. You did it alone, because I wanted you to feel proud of yourself. I wanted you to love the man you were building, not the money behind him." She placed one hand gently over her belly. "But you weren't building anything, Daniel. You were tearing it all down, and you didn't even notice because you were too busy pretending." The conference room remained utterly silent, every board member, every investor, every witness in that room understanding, in that single devastating moment, that they had just watched an entire empire, and an entire marriage, collapse in real time. 20 minutes later, in a quiet side office away from the board's shocked whispers, Daniel finally found himself alone with Emily, the adrenaline of humiliation curdling rapidly into something uglier, defensiveness, anger, wounded pride. "You manipulated me," he said, his voice low and shaking. "For 4 years, you let me believe I built this company myself. You controlled everything. The money, the truth, all of it. While I walked around thinking I was in charge of my own life." Emily stood by the window, one hand resting on the small of her back, exhausted but steady. "I never controlled you, Daniel. I supported you, quietly, because I wanted to believe in the man I married, not the man who needed his wife's fortune to feel important." "You should have told me." "What?" "And you should have told me you were selling the company behind everyone's back," she shot back, her calm finally cracking into something sharper. "You should have told me about Megan, You should have told me about the divorce papers sitting in your jacket pocket for weeks, Daniel, while you let me believe we were still fighting for something together. His anger faltered slightly at the mention of the divorce papers, guilt flickering briefly across his face before hardening again into defensiveness. That was different. I was scared, the company was failing, I was drowning in debt, and I didn't know what else to do. So your solution, Emily said quietly, was to lie to me, cheat on me, and try to sell away everything I spent 4 years protecting, without once asking me for help? Daniel's jaw tightened. Why would I ask you for help? You never even told me you had anything to offer. Emily's expression softened slightly, not with weakness but with something closer to sad understanding. My father was cheated by people who only loved him for his money, she said quietly. In-laws who smiled at him while quietly stealing everything he built. On his deathbed, he made me promise never to let anyone love me for my wealth. He wanted me to know, at least once in my life, what it felt like to be chosen simply for who I was, not what I owned. She looked directly into Daniel's eyes, her voice steady despite the tears finally gathering there. I wanted that with you. I wanted you to build something real, something honest, and to love me, not my name, not my money, just me. And for a while, Daniel, I actually believed you did. Daniel's anger crumbled slowly into something far heavier, the devastating realization settling over him piece by piece. The woman he had mocked publicly for being poor, the woman he had dismissed as an embarrassment in front of investors, the woman he had been quietly preparing to abandon. She was the only reason he had ever had anything to be arrogant about in the first place. I built nothing, he whispered, more to himself than to her, his voice breaking. Every investor meeting, every deal, every moment I felt proud of myself. It was you. It was always you, standing behind me, and I never even noticed. Emily didn't respond immediately. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to protect. She simply turned toward the door, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Outside, in the hallway, Megan was being quietly confronted by 2 board members, her earlier confidence dissolving rapidly as the true scale of the situation became clear to her as well. I didn't know, Megan insisted, her voice tight with genuine shock. I knew about the divorce plans. I knew he was unhappy in his marriage, but I swear, I had no idea his wife was the majority shareholder. He never told me any of this. It was, in its own bitter way, one final layer of dramatic irony. Megan, who had encouraged Daniel's reckless plans, had been just as blindsided by the truth as he was, both of them building elaborate futures on a foundation neither of them ever fully understood. Emily walked out of Rushline's offices that afternoon without looking back. Old Frank steady beside her, Samantha close behind, leaving Daniel standing alone in the wreckage of everything he had spent years pretending to build by himself. News travels fast in small business circles, but scandal travels faster. Within 48 hours, Rushline's board convened an emergency session and formally voted to remove Daniel as CEO, citing unauthorized attempts to sell company assets without proper shareholder consent. A serious breach that violated not just company bylaws but basic trust. Reynolds, upon learning that the majority shareholder had never actually been consulted about the sale, immediately withdrew his offer entirely, his legal team scrambling to distance him from any documents Daniel had prematurely signed. What Daniel believed was a nearly finalized deal evaporated instantly, legally voided the moment Emily's ownership became public record. The story didn't stay contained within boardrooms for long. A video from months earlier, the mall confrontation, filmed by strangers and quietly circulating online with modest views, suddenly resurfaced with new context attached. Someone connected the dots publicly. The man mocking his poor pregnant wife over a return stroller was the same CEO who had just lost his company after secretly trying to sell it behind his billionaire wife's back. The video exploded across social media within hours. Comment sections filled with outrage, disbelief, and a strange kind of collective satisfaction people feel when arrogance meets consequence. News outlets picked up the story. Business publications ran headlines analyzing the collapse of Rushline's leadership. Strangers who once filmed Emily's humiliation now filmed themselves reacting to the twist, the story trending under names like "the CEO who lost everything his poor wife built." Daniel watched it all unfold from his now empty office, boxes packed haphazardly around him, his phone buzzing endlessly with messages he no longer had the energy to answer. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. Investors who once praised his charisma now distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to be associated with the very public collapse of both his company and his character. Megan resigned quietly within the week, accepting a position at a smaller firm across the city, choosing to disappear from the narrative entirely rather than remain tangled in its wreckage. Perhaps the most painful consequence for Daniel wasn't the loss of the company itself, or even the public humiliation splashed across headlines and comment sections. It was smaller, quieter than that. The moment he stood outside the same mall where he had once humiliated Emily over a stroller, watching a news crew film a segment near the exact spot, recounting his downfall to a small crowd of curious onlookers. He stood there for a long time, unnoticed in the gathering dusk, watching strangers discuss his life as though it were nothing more than an entertaining cautionary tale. Emily never publicly commented on any of it. She didn't give interviews. She didn't post statements. While Daniel's world collapsed loudly and visibly, she remained quiet, focused entirely on something far more important than vindication, the new life about to enter the world, and the peace she had finally allowed herself to reclaim. Justice in the end didn't arrive through revenge or public shaming orchestrated by Emily herself. It arrived simply through truth. The same truth Daniel had spent years avoiding, finally catching up to him all at once, exactly the way quiet truths often do. There was no dramatic press conference, no public statement dismantling his reputation piece by piece. Emily didn't need one. The truth had already done that work on its own, spreading through boardrooms and comment sections and quiet conversations between people who once admired him. Sometimes karma doesn't need to be delivered by the person who was wronged. Sometimes it simply needs the wronged person to finally stop protecting the lie and let it collapse under its own weight. Reynolds, for his part, walked away from the entire situation publicly unscathed, though privately more cautious than before, having learned a hard lesson about assuming he understood the full picture before signing anything. Daniel's former co-founders, humiliated by association, spent months quietly rebuilding the company's reputation with Emily's guidance, grateful that the woman they had once dismissed as just the CEO's wife turned out to be the very reason their jobs still existed at all. Emily delivered her daughter on a quiet Thursday evening, in a private hospital room filled not with the chaos of scandal or collapsed companies, but with the steady presence of the people who had actually stood by her. Old Frank pacing nervously in the hallway, Samantha gripping her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement in a voice thick with emotion. Daniel wasn't there. He had called once, hours earlier, his voice hollow and uncertain, asking if he could come. Emily, exhausted and overwhelmed, had simply said, "Not today," and ended the call gently, without anger, without cruelty, just quiet, necessary distance. Months passed. The scandal faded from headlines, replaced by newer stories, newer outrages, the way public attention always moves restlessly forward. Emily stepped fully into her role at Zara Holdings, no longer hiding behind anonymous transfers and locked drawers, running rush lines, rebuilding under her own name, her own terms, finally free of the exhausting weight of pretending to be someone smaller than she actually was. Daniel, meanwhile, began again from nearly nothing. He took an entry-level position at a small logistics company, the kind of job he once would have considered beneath him, learning slowly, painfully, what it actually felt like to build something without shortcuts, without hidden safety nets, without anyone quietly catching him every time he fell. One afternoon, nearly a year after that devastating Thursday, a letter arrived at his small rented apartment. He recognized Emily's handwriting immediately on the envelope, his heart tightening with a mixture of hope and dread as he opened it. Inside wasn't the divorce paperwork he half expected. It was an invitation. Simple, handwritten, to his daughter's first birthday celebration. Beneath the details of the date and time, one final line was written in Emily's careful hand. "I never wanted your empire, Daniel. I wanted your honesty. Earn that, and you're welcome back. Not before." He sat alone in his small apartment for a long time, holding the letter, tears finally breaking free after months of quiet, exhausting rebuilding. The story doesn't end with dramatic revenge, or with Daniel losing everything forever, or with Emily closing her heart completely against the possibility of forgiveness. It ends somewhere quieter, more honest than that, with a woman who finally stopped hiding her worth, running a company under her own true name, raising her daughter surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was. And somewhere across the city, a man who once mocked his poor pregnant wife in a crowded mall now spent his evenings learning, slowly and humbly, what real honesty actually costs, and what it might someday, if he proved himself worthy, allow him to rebuild. Somewhere in that same warm evening light, old Frank stood a little apart from the small gathering, watching Emily laugh with her daughter, fulfilling a promise he had made to a dying man years ago in a quiet hospital room. He had watched over her, exactly as he swore he would. Not because she was weak, but because, just as her father had warned, she was too trusting for her own good. Now, watching her stand tall, unguarded, finally free of the secrets that once weighed her down, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The final image lingers, simple and unforgettable, a little girl, completely unaware of any of the chaos that once surrounded her arrival, laughing brightly in her mother's arms, bathed in warm evening light. A new beginning built not on secrets, not on money, not on image, but finally, quietly, on truth.
Moral of the story: true worth is never measured by appearances, and love that needs a lie to survive was never love at all. Daniel spent years believing his success was his own, and his wife was beneath him, only to learn that the woman he mocked in public had quietly carried the weight of his entire life on her shoulders. Emily spent years hiding her worth to protect a promise, only to learn that silence, no matter how well intentioned, can never replace honesty in a marriage. The story asks a simple question: would you still love this person if they had nothing to offer you but themselves? Daniel failed that test before he ever knew it was being given. Emily passed it, but paid a painful price for waiting too long to stop testing him in the first place. In the end, the lesson isn't about money, karma, or public humiliation.